All right, friends, welcome back to another episode of DrJRadio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the city of dead. I know Christmas is around the corner, or Hanukkah, or whatever you believe, but I like City of Dead more than City of Angels because I gotta say, there are not very many angels living here in Los Angeles. Los Angeles. Poli di Angeli, which is in Greek, as I told you last time. Now, today is one of my favorite topics. We are speaking to someone who has penned 11 books, has appeared on multiple TV shows on the topic that we're about to speak about. The one and only Mr. Sam Baltrusis. Sam, welcome to the show.
Hi, how's it going, Dr. J?
It's a pleasure. Pleasure to have you. Now, tell us how you got started into paranormal researching, specifically ghosts, and then even more specifically into Salem.
Well, I was a journalist for many years, and a lot of my journalism, I did some investigative journalism work back in the day. I worked in radio, I worked in television, I worked in print, and then but I would, as a journalist and as someone who would write articles for local magazines, I would always do like the typical Halloween haunted story. Meanwhile, I had a background that was pretty much equivalent to say Danny Torrance from The Shining. I was a clairvoyant, kind of in the making as a kid, and then that escalated as I went further along as an author. So I wrote my first book in 2012,
Hmm.
and it kind of exploded from there. And I started off as sort of, I would say, kind of wanting to write just about history with ghost stories,
But
but
this
then
is
it
history,
kind of,
though, right? You're
well, it's
speaking
still
about history, especially with Salem.
right. History, is basic. Like a ghost is history, wanting to have a voice. So for me, my books are still historical, but I definitely have taken more of an open mind when it comes to the paranormal. I started trying to be like a skeptic, like a typical journalist writing about ghosts, like, do they exist? Perhaps, kind of thing. And then I went from that to they definitely exist, and here's the proof, kind of thing.
Now, I have, before we begin about Salem, I have two questions I ask of everyone involved in ghost hunting, whether it be Jeff Bellinger to Grant Wilson, you name it. And here we go. The first one. Have you ever come across a ghost that is non terrestrial, like an alien ghost?
I am terrified of aliens, and I've always been since I was a little kid. I will say this: that some of the shadow figures that I've experienced as a paranormal investigator and researcher, there's potential there that they could be not necessarily earthbound, but from out of this world. So I'm open to it, but I'm scared of aliens, to be honest with you.
I'm scared of both, and truthfully, part of me is actually more scared of ghosts because they could be making noises. If they're very angry, they can mess with you. Like, I'm sure you might have heard of Demons in Seattle, Keith Linner, Bothell
Right.
Hell House. This poor guy moved out of his house, which was haunted by very, very wicked spirits. And even if he's in a hotel, another state, they're bothering him every night. The poking, the prodding, I mean, the burning of the Bibles, a 300-pound love seat thrown at him and his fiancee at the time. It's just that's what scares me. ETs, generally you would see them, I would think. I have not yet to come across one myself. And sure, yeah, they have telepathy. At least most people say that a lot of them do. And they may have powers like telekinesis so they could levitate themselves instead of walking. But even though they look weird, are probably far more intelligent than us, or at least just think differently. For me, it's the ghosts that frighten the hell out of me.
Well, I mean, I was on national TV. I basically got an attachment that took over my body, and it had to be removed. So I have a love-hate relationship with ghosts. I mean, I would consider this more of an entity as opposed to a ghost.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely, I've had wonderful experiences where I connect with spirit, and I've had experiences where I almost died. So. Yeah, it's been a kind of bittersweet journey.
Yeah, to say the least, right?
Right.
Now, were you able to, before I ask the second question, were you able to get rid of this attachment?
Yeah, it was featured on the Travel Channel. It was an episode called Provoking Evil on a Haunting. So I basically was trans-channeling what turned out to be an entity. His name was, it was a ghost story that went really wrong really fast. I was trans-channeling the spirit or this entity. He ended up kind of attaching himself to me, and to the point where I was going in and out of consciousness for about 7 to 8 days. I didn't realize how bad it was until my friend Joni Mahan, who's a fellow author, she basically said something's wrong with Sam, and she called in a shaman. And shaman Michael Robichaud came to my rescue and did a cleansing, and basically said, "Hey, he gave a description of the entity. It's like he's 27 years old. He's obnoxious. He comes from a wealthy family," and then I came to the realization that it had to have been Richard Crownshield who murdered Captain Joseph White in 1830 in Salem. And I talk about him all the time, but when I was doing this, it was kind of a Halloween presentation event, and I ended up kind of bringing. I called him without even knowing I called him, and then I was trans-channeling him, and then he kind of stuck around. So I didn't push him out, and yeah. I mean, I had to get a shaman had to come and basically save my life. It was really bad.
Well, at least it wasn't an exorcism, right?
It wasn't an exorcism. I mean, the wordings because it was a really bad entity. So when you would say exorcism, you probably would refer to a demon. It wasn't a demon, but it was a really bad entity that murdered somebody.
Yeah, the worst kind, right there. Literally, the only worse than murder is child murder, child molestation, because innocence of the
Right.
youth to me is the one thing that you really can't violate, and then add in murder, and those are the two crimes that no one should even consider doing, let alone acting upon them. Anyhow, second question for you. This is the standard of the two. Have you ever come across a ghost that speaks in a dead language, like Sumerian, ancient Greek, etc.?
Well, when I worked on the USS Salem, I had an experience where the spirits on board were speaking. I wasn't sure what the language was. It turns out that it was Greek, but
Greek.
and which I didn't know at the time. But I would basically, with recordings and then just talking to people who did speak Greek, we figured out that it was Greek. So I wouldn't say a dead language, but I would say I've definitely encountered other languages, also French too. I had an experience. I was working on my book called Ghosts of the American Revolution. I had a female spirit basically say murder. I was working on the book. Basically, this woman was murdered, and she basically said I was murdered, but she said it in French, and I can't say it in French because I don't really know French. But I wrote it down, and then it translated it, and it was I was murdered. So not
she was
dead
murdered,
languages.
right? The ghost, right? Not that you're going to be murdered. That she was murdered.
She said, well, yeah, she said I was murdered. Yeah, not me, Sam. The spirit said I was murdered.
Now, what sort of tools do you use when you go ghost hunting?
I am very old school. So I use dowsing rods, and dowsing rods, pendulums, tarot cards, kind of witchy in my approach. My dowsing rods have been charged by a high priestess in Salem. So I do a lot of like old school tools. I have used the newer fangled things like spirit boxes and all like all sorts of the new stuff. And to be honest with you, it doesn't really impress me. And I don't have. I can use all the equipment. I just don't necessarily feel like I have a strong communication with the spirits using these tools. But I do. I think one of my favorite tools actually is a recorder for EVPs. And I do like using my recorder, but when it comes to all the, like the fancy things like Goo Buddy and all of that, I'm not necessarily, I don't use them out in the field.
You mentioned the recordings, especially of that ghost speaking Greek. Is there a way we can have access to these so we can play these sometime? Maybe next time you're on?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. But again, when I communicate with the spirits, I do EVP recordings, and I don't always keep them do you investigate or
more UFOs? But see, I'm not
right.
a field investigator. What I do is I look for patterns. So, for instance, if Sam said that he was taken by grays in a disc-shaped craft at, say, the middle of the night from home, and then I speak to, I don't know, another John out there, and he says, I was abducted with a triangular-shaped craft through my house with grays and reptiles. Well, what would you have in common right there? You have the abduction. You have the fact that they're being taken from their homes, and they're both involve grays. That right there is what I've been doing for decades. So it's more patterns that I do passively. Fortunately, I've become very more active, and I see uh, doing interviews as my way of investigation, especially speaking to people such as yourselves. Now, I also realized that you cannot separate aliens and ghosts. The paranormal umbrella covers them all.
Right. Well, so getting back to what I do, which is kind of similar, I write books. So my books are about giving a voice to the spirits. So when I interview spirits, when I do my books, I'm actually interviewing the spirits. So whether it's like with EVP, so I don't keep all my EVPs and have them ready to play in a radio show. What I do is I keep pretty intense notes along the way when I investigate, and then I use that to write my books.
A question for you. Have any of the ghosts you've come across that you've had a chance to interact with via interview have told you of a future that has come true?
Well, I'm clairvoyant, so I communicate with spirits. A lot of it is like what's happened to them when they were alive. I haven't gotten a prophecy on spirit of something in the future. It's generally been what's happened to them. So more of what's happened in the past and kind of figuring out the story, whether they were attacked or whether like their story has been kind of twisted over time with history. So kind of like a historical psychic. Like I go and uncover the history and the true story to these ghosts, if you will. But no, I haven't really been given like a prediction for the future. Not like a Nostradamus prediction.
Yeah, or like a 9/11 on 9/10 or something like that. Yeah, I get you.
Right.
Okay. Now, obviously, you mentioned this wicked attachment. What is the most wicked or evil spirit that you've encountered?
I would have to say, even though the Richard Crowninshield attachment was horrible for me and almost killed me, I wouldn't say that was the worst experience that I've had. In many ways, I'm kind of sympathetic to the spirit because when I was trans-channeling him, I was getting information that he was framed, that he didn't act alone in the murder of Captain Joseph White. That's kind of why I would kind of let him in because he was giving me all this information. I would say, so out of all the experiences that I've had, and I've never encountered a demon, and I've been probably the most haunted places ever. I would say that I'm having an issue in Salem involving a shadow figure that's kind of been stalking me. I would probably say, based on what people call this shadow figure, it's the Hat Man. And I would say that this.
I can't believe you just said that. I just interviewed for the first time in my life someone who is an investigator of Hatman, and to tell you the truth, I had never heard of Hatman prior to, and yet after the interview, I got so many comments of people saying they've seen Hatman, their children have seen Hatman, but I was blown away that there's this elusive figure, like a Slender Man sort of type with a hat, that
Right.
it shows up around when bad things are about to happen or when bad things do happen. But either way, it scares the crap out of people.
Yeah, well, this this entity has, I would say, kind of been stalking me. Now, do I think it's gonna wants to hurt me? No, I think it's a kind of watcher, and it wants to show me things. So I think in some situations, in some ways, like I don't like talking about it because it kind of gives it power. So I don't really talk about it too much on like like on radio shows, that kind of thing. But I will say this: like usually it's at a location where there's been a large amount of deaths, so it's kind of like an aura of disaster at the location. Getting back to what we're talking about, extraterrestrial, there is a theory that this figure is an ET. So it could be something that is not human, and something from out of this world that wants to relay information to me. Of course, when you see something like that, you're going to be terrified, and I definitely have been really, really scared. But I also didn't get the feeling that it wanted to hurt me. I think it wanted to let me know something. And it keeps coming back, and it won't leave me alone. So it won't leave me alone. But yeah, it's definitely that. I would say that out of all the things that I've encountered, the recurring visitation from this Hat Man figure has been the most terrifying thing that I've encountered.
You know, I'm so glad you brought Hatman up, and I wasn't prepared for this. And like I said, just because I recently interviewed someone in the last it'll be 8 years soon that I've been doing this, and I cannot believe I've never heard of Hatman until recently. And then when, some people mocked Hatman, but the amount of people who said they saw him or have relatives, especially children, who saw him, that to me was more confirmation than it's not just some loonies in a loony bin that are making this crap up. It's not Hollywood. Why would someone decide to create Hatman? Think about it, right? You would want to create like a more ghoulish type of figure, like a Baphomet. That's what people would say, I would think, if you want to use your mind, your creativeness to make a story up. First of all, it wouldn't be consistent with people from around the world, by the way. I know mostly in America because this is watched around the world, but at the same time, it's the details are so even. They're consistent, and that's why it scared the crap out of me so much.
Yeah, and like with that said, that the Hat Man phenomenon, I was kind of in the school of like it was kind of a made up hocus pocus kind of scenario until I experienced this entity. However, with that said, I'm not 100% convinced that this is the Hat Man. It may just be an entity that wears a hat. The hat is kind of significant in regards to its colonial era hat. So it's kind of like a smaller hat, and then it also has red eyes, so to make it more terrifying, kind of like red glowing eyes. But with that said, I'm a clairvoyant, so I can see things that other people will not necessarily see. But I also think that whatever this entity is, it wants to tell me something. And getting back to the question, like, did anyone tell me like prophecies of the future? Maybe that's what that is. I mean, maybe it's trying to tell me something, that to warn me about something, or to let me know about something that happened, or it may have been wants to go back. Maybe it's E.T. wants to go home kind of thing. Like maybe it's stuck here and was conjured in Salem, which happens in some cases in Salem because there's a lot of weekend witches where they just kind of conjure things and they don't actually close and send them back. So not really sure. All I know is that it's been very scary encountering this figure in Salem.
There is a question for you here. Let me make sure I find it because there's been enough comments here. This is from Lasha Senyek. And Lasha, thank you so much for the image that everyone is now seeing. Also, there's another image from Pam, and I'll thank her afterwards. But Lasha's question, here it goes. Did the ghost that was attached to him want to kill him? Ooh, freaky.
No. Well, okay, so this is what was going on with the attachment. The attachment kind of, first of all, when it first kind of took over, I would say, and like, well, this is me going in and out of consciousness throughout the attachment, was that it wanted me to drink alcohol. And I've been sober for many years, so I didn't feed that, what the entity wanted. So then I think it got bored with me. And it wanted, I would wake up by my balcony. So it basically was saying, do it. So it wanted me to kill myself. And so it didn't want to kill me. Like, it physically couldn't hurt me, but I could hurt me when I was under the influence of this entity. So it did want me dead. Yeah.
That's actually really freaky. Have you ever known of a time when a ghost did in fact kill someone? I mean, like I said, I mentioned from Keith Linder that there were attempts, but I don't know if they were more so intended to frighten him than to actually cause him harm. But definitely, like, his shirt was caught on fire, multiple things were thrown at him, but I got the impression that this poor guy was just invading a property that the ghost said, no, it's mine.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I've encountered that on the U.S. Salem, where he wanted to scare me and scare my people, people like on my staff that were investigating the location. I don't think I have a good example of someone being killed by a spirit. However, who knows when it comes to suicides or botched exorcisms, or there's so many unexplained deaths that happen out there. Do we know the whole backstory to those deaths? Do we know, was it an attachment? I think that there are people out there, and I've encountered people in the last few weeks that have attachments, and they don't even know that they have attachments. They just know that their life is going down very fast. And, luckily for me, my friend Joni noticed the difference in my personality. And then my pupils were dilating, and they were going all the way black. So there were physical manifestations too. It wasn't just me in my head. It was actually physical stuff you can see in my body. I looked really different physically during this infestation. And so, no, the killing, but I do think that, that the mind is very powerful, and I think that spirits can be very powerful too. And a lot of times people misinterpret their abilities as a clairvoyant or like an empath or sensitive to the paranormal with anxiety or other mental illness, when it really, in fact, is their sensitivity to the paranormal. So, long story short, no, but I think there's probably I know many cases where there are people have had an attachment and it went bad, really fast.
You're absolutely right. We do have crazy unsolved, which we presume are suicides, and murders that don't make any logical sense. There's just so many different things, and also the spectrum of what we can see. with our own eyes is so small. Can you imagine if we had the ability to see everything? X-ray, I mean everything. Wouldn't we be so full on this planet with spirits?
I mean, I'll tell you, like a lot of people that I'm friends with who are psychic and they become more and more, it's like a muscle that you work. And, my muscle is pretty strong because I work that muscle a lot. However, it can make you go a little crazy too. So you have to be really careful not to keep going to that well of information, because it will push you over the edge. So it's important to kind of ground yourself. And it's great to communicate with spirit, but I can't do it 24/7. I can only do it when I need to do it, which is usually when I'm working on a book. Then I'll turn it on, or I'm working on a case, which I'm doing a residential case now that I'm working on. So it really depends on the situation. But my main goal really for having that gift is to help other people, living and dead. So, if I can tell a story of someone who was wrongly accused of a crime, I want to use my gift to be able to do that. If I tend to kind of gravitate toward the marginalized, and that includes the victims of the Salem witch trials. So I really want to give a voice to those without a voice, and that goes for the living and the dead.
I'm glad you mentioned that. The Salem witch trials was such BS. So many women were burned at the stake just because someone thought they were a witch. And sure, I would think there were some, but most of them, hell no. And that bothers me to know that people were so scared in Salem, Massachusetts at the time, they found no other recourse than to burn the woman.
Well, Dr. J, they weren't burned; they were hanged. And one gentleman was pressed to death over a 2, maybe 3-day period. So my mother thought the same. So you're not alone. A lot of people think because of pop culture that the innocent men and women, weren't just women, were executed. They were hanged. They weren't burned at the stake. I think there's a couple of movies that burn witches at the stake, and that includes Elvira. So maybe people picked up from Elvira. But with that said, and also Hocus Pocus too. But with that said, I mean, it was horrific what happened in 1692. 19 innocent men and women were hanged. One gentleman, Giles Corey, was pressed to death. It was over a 9-month period. It happened in 1692. Salem at the time was not what we know of Salem today. So that was considered Salem town. The initial hysteria happened in modern day Danvers, Topsfield, which is where I got the attachment from, and then also Peabody, and then the location that's often overlooked is Andover, which had a large portion of its population, about 80%, involved with the witch trial. So this was a scourge on this entire area of Massachusetts.
Before I get to first of all, let me give a shout out to Justin T. Thank you so much, Justin, for your super chat, and cheers to you and the Blue Crew. And in 2020, I promise you, we will jump together. We will skydive together, my friend. Now back to you. Before I read this other question for you, Sam, here goes. What's the population percentage-wise of men and women that were executed in some way, shape, or form in the 1600s because they were accused of witchcraft?
You want me to give a percentage of how many people of the population?
Yeah. Was it 1 in 20, 1 in 10, or worse than that?
No, it wasn't worse than that. And it was for example, 150 people were accused in the Salem area. Population, I would say, it was 80% of Andover, for example, were either accusers or the accused. I would probably, and it was very rare outside of this area for being accused of witchcraft. I can't really give a percentage off the top of my head. I would have to do really quantitative research to be able to do that. But yeah, I mean, Salem was small, so we're talking about hundreds of people. Everybody knew each other, and 20 people were out of like about 1,000 people were executed, and 150 were accused.
That's
so
sad.
Whatever that percentage is, I would say, but yeah, I can't give you an exact number off the top of my head.
Well, there definitely weren't millions of people back then in Salem,
No.
Massachusetts, let alone across the northeastern United States. This is just a few years, as a matter of fact, after George Washington, and so it's just pretty sad. Real quick, I have another shout out. I want to thank the one and only Tammy George. Thank you as well for your super chat, and God bless you. Okay, here's the question for you, Sam. It's been sitting here for a few minutes. Let me read it to you. Has he ever been bothered by the ghost of an animal, like a demon dog or something?
No, but I definitely have encountered ghost cats, and I've actually never had like a demon dog. Although I will say this on the U.S. of Salem, I have said in the past, I called it a demon dog because you would hear like a growl coming from the U.S. of Salem. So, but I would think that it was just a dog that was kind of coming. That's how I can tell that the spirit's there. It would growl. But no, I haven't come across a demon dog, but I've come across ghost animals, like ghost cats and even ghost horses. I had a ghost horse encounter in Pennock Island, which is in Boston Harbor. And so, yeah, so horses, dogs, and cats I've encountered. No ghost mice. And ghost pigs too.
I've heard of ghost wolves. You ever come across that or read about them?
Well, ghost wolves, I mean, it's weird that you say that. I actually have. So my spirit animal is raven. However, I did have a situation, and it was actually right after the possession was more of an entity manipulation, where I woke up and I saw a wolf with blue eyes looking at me, and this is after this is while I was sleeping. Now, I had a shaman. The shaman basically removed the entity from me. So my thoughts are it was the wolf was like looking out for me when I was sleeping. So yeah, I definitely have encountered wolves, but I wouldn't view them as evil. It was a very beautiful animal.
Well, didn't the American Indians also consider it a very beautiful animal?
Yeah, I mean, and I definitely have Native American within my blood. So maybe it was my ancestors that were giving me that, or maybe it was the shaman. Because the shaman, after Michael Robichaud did the removal from me, he does look out for me. His spirits do look out for me. And I'll tell you, I had a situation where it involved the Conjuring House, where there was someone that was at the Conjuring House, and they came to me, and the spirit jumped.
Conjuring House.
Right.
Can you remind me a little bit about that? Where is that? I'm assuming Massachusetts?
Right, it's in Rhode Island. And so it's a farmhouse that, so if you've seen the movie The Conjuring, it's based on the Perron family haunting that happened in the 70s. So it was recently purchased and by a couple who are from Maine. And so there was supposedly the Ed Lorraine Warren came.
Oh, yes.
Famous case.
I do know them. Didn't Lorraine just pass, actually?
Well, I'm sorry?
Didn't Lorraine Warren just pass away recently?
She did. And she died about less than a year ago. We just did an event for her at my Paracon in Lenox. But yeah, so this case was famous. It was featured in the movie called The Conjuring. And then it's the farmhouse that's in Harrisville, Rhode Island, was purchased by a young couple. There was a girl that came to investigate. She picked up something that was like a black mist. The black mist jumped on me, and the shaman, my friend Michael Robichaud, who did the removal before, his spirits picked up that there was something wrong with me. So what I'm saying is that if I get into trouble, Michael Robichaud, the shaman, his spirits will alert him to let him know that I'm in trouble. And so the story wasn't about the Conjuring house. It was actually about the fact that I'm being watched by his spirits and they're being protected by his spirits.
I don't know if I've seen The Conjuring. I might have, but definitely Amityville and definitely Annabelle only because of Tony Spera. And what scares me more about Annabelle is not the ghoulish looks, the demonic look the doll has in the movie, but the fact that it's a Raggedy Ann doll. That's what bothers me the most. It's like a child's doll, looks so innocent, and this thing could potentially be killing and harming people. I'm sure you've known of all the stories. This one guy was asleep with his wife, and he had a dream that Annabelle was crawled up on him and was choking him. And he woke up with three slashes, razor sharp slashes to his torso. Things like that. I don't know how. I doubt very many people reporting this are loony, especially since they're so consistent. Even Zach Baggins had an incident with Annabelle, which I will ask him about when I bring him on.
Yeah, I mean, ask him why did he touch Annabelle?
Yeah,
Because
thank you.
that was
Thank you. That's
yeah.
what I want to
Like,
ask.
why did
That's
you?
my number one question, actually.
I'm like, Zach, you were told not to touch Annabelle. Why did you touch Annabelle? But yeah, I mean, with that said, I mean, I definitely have been kind of wary, or like, I stay away from Annabelle. I have friends who, have had events with Annabelle there. There was an event in the region in New Hampshire last year where Annabelle came. And I'm like, I'm not going to this event. Sorry, even though I was friends with the producer of the event, but I just don't want to be in the same room with Annabelle. I will say this: I just had an experience with a doll it was an event in Braintree, and I was giving a lecture, and this doll it's a granny Ken, so it was a granny doll, which was creepy in itself. Like that it was a doll that looked like a grandmother. But the granny Ken was sitting behind me. I had a noose around its neck. And when I went up to speak, this haunted object made my right ear go deaf. I couldn't hear out of my right ear. And then I'm like, it's just really bad energy. So I've actually have had experiences with enchanted or haunted objects, and I try my best to stay away from them because someone that's sensitive as I am to this stuff, I don't want to lose hearing in my right ear while I'm trying to lecture. So I stayed away, especially Annabelle. I just don't want to be in the same room with this stuff. It's just a lot of people are fascinated by it, but I'm just like I'm very cautious. Like I don't want to touch Annabelle, or I know you can't touch Annabelle, but be in the same room with Annabelle. I just don't think it's good.
No, neither do I, especially with all the stories that Tony Sperry told me and how he has to travel with her. He said he wants two first class seats, one for him and one for Annabelle. I can't even imagine what the flight crew is thinking. A doll in first class, but that's the way he says it has to be. But after Zach touched Annabelle or whatever the story is, but I believe he touched her because producers say he was entranced by Annabelle. This thing is very demented and demonic.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching the show. I've been kind of getting to Ghost Adventures. They just went to the Conjuring house or the farmhouse we were talking about earlier.
Yes.
They did a Halloween special at this farmhouse. So he's done that too. So they just came back from that for the Halloween special. But yes, I don't know why he touched Annabelle. I do know that there have been several reports of like people saying that they have Annabelle, and they'll go to an event with a Raggedy Ann doll, claiming that it's the actual Annabelle doll, and that is so wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
So wrong.
Very wrong, especially considering that if Annabelle the doll really knew that she, or I'm assuming it's a she, that spirit was being falsified and just for profit, then I would think that Annabelle could do some serious damage to those who are using her likeness and her name, even though it's not her.
Absolutely, and I think that I kind of getting back to giving things power. Like I don't want to give these things too much power because I think when we're terrified, these entities or the bad stuff feeds off our fear. So I do my best to just block those things out. But of course, I come across things like a hat man out in the field, or I come across things similar, like a doll that looks like a grandmother with a noose around its neck. So it's kind of inevitable to come across those things, but I do try my best to stay a far distance from things that I know that have a bad reputation, and I don't want to feed it any of my energy because I think it feeds off fear. I think
Of
Annabelle feeds off fear.
course. Yes.
What you were asking earlier about, was there a death associated with a ghost? According to Ed Warren, there was a gentleman who provoked Annabelle at the museum in Connecticut, and he was on a motorcycle.
College
And
kid.
after
That's
leaving,
right. Yeah, yeah. The
and
college kid with his
after leaving,
girlfriend.
after leaving, he was on a motorcycle and he ended up running into a tree. So yeah, I mean, I do think that you do. Obviously, if he was provoking Annabelle, then he didn't believe in Annabelle. But I do think, and it could have just been coincidental. But I have too much anecdotal evidence from people and people's experiences to kind of know, stay away from Annabelle.
Yes, yes, to say the least. Now, after I talked to Tony Spera about Annabelle, I went on a wormhole, I guess you could say a Google wormhole about other inanimate objects that became animated. And I found that Child's Play, the Chucky doll, is actually
Right.
based on Robert the Doll. I think it's circa 1906 in uh, Florida Keys, in the museum right there. Do you know anything about Robert the Doll?
I grew up in Florida. I moved here in the '90s, so
Hmm.
I never seen Robert the Doll in the Key West is where Robert the Doll is. I've seen pictures. I just have never have seen him up close. I had been to Key West before, but I never went. But again, I stay away from those things. So I try my best not to get close to Robert the Doll or Annabelle or any of the haunted objects that we read about. I'm just too sensitive to do that. I think it would not be a good mix for me and the doll to be in the same room.
No, no, that's why I fear them too. If I had a chance to see Annabelle in person, I don't know what it would take for me to get there, but I could tell you right now unequivocally no. Hell no. No amount of money will take me there, and I don't care if I'm surrounded by a group of people who say they can protect me. I do not want to walk away, get in a car, and wreck. Or I don't want to jump out of a plane just for my main and reserve to fail because I touched this doll.
And I'll tell you about the Granny Ken's doll. So I had that experience of my ear going deaf in the right ear when I was speaking in Braintree. So anyway, both my friend Christine, who's also a psychic, we both picked up imagery of what looked like a 1950s ambulance. So there was a woman that was attached to that doll that dates back to like the 50s, the 40s, 50s. And there was an old school ambulance associated with that. So on our way home from that event in Braintree, guess what almost hit us on the highway?
What?
An ambulance.
You're
An
kidding.
ambulance.
Wow.
Right. And so we were almost smushed by an ambulance after this event. And like that to me is like that's enough for me to go, okay, like that I was in the car with me and my friend Christine and my friend Jason Baker, who's a photographer. So we had 3 people in the car who saw this ambulance almost smush us. So I do think it was related to the doll. But again, I'm not gonna go to these things to try to provoke them or even interact with them because things like that happen to me. So I stay far, far away from that stuff.
I would so too, definitely. Now, see, the problem is with watching YouTube these days, videos can definitely be modified. They could make inanimate objects look animate if you're good at editing and Photoshop, whatever it be, technical person. And I'm not that. 100 years ago, that wasn't so much the case. I mean, how could you fake video or pictures, photography? But it seems to me that nowadays that seems to be our easiest excuse. Oh no, no, that's a fake video. No, no, that's not real. That just makes it look real. And what do you think? Is that just because people's psyche want to suppress what's happening, or the possibility that something not alive, no heart, is sure as hell acting alive?
I will say this. I think that a lot of the spirits that I encounter out in the field, they don't want to be videotaped. Like I've been in situations where we've like done investigations on camera, and they don't want to be they don't, and I literally get from them like, turn off the camera, or they'll turn off the camera for you. So I think I think that spirits don't act on command. They don't like, hey, we want to, I'm Zach Bagans, I want to, capture you on camera. I don't think that happens. It's very rare if it does happen. So if you see something like a video that's like a Paranormal Caught on Camera, which is a show, I actually like that show, but I think that some of the stuff that you see on YouTube or on that show, some of it's questionable. But I definitely think what's interesting about that show is you have the experts weighing in on the phenomenon, whether it's Hat Man, like let's say if you capture something that could have been Hat Man, that would kind of raise a discussion over that topic. If it was on focusing on, possession or whatever the topic is, it's actually it's a great tool to kind of educate people about it. Whether or not it's real or not, it doesn't really matter. What does matter is it opens up the dialogue and the communication about the topic and educates people.
I definitely agree with that. Now, have you come across, like I said, I saw in a lot of videos about other dolls. For instance, this gentleman is speaking, live streaming on YouTube, and the doll behind him starts moving. There's another case where in Mexico, three gentlemen are using a Ouija board, and all of a sudden, one person sees a doll move, but it wasn't everyone brushed the other two brushed it off. They kept playing with the Ouija board, and then the doll literally fell off the shelf or jumped off the shelf onto them, and it scared the crap out of them. So those are the reasons that to me I've like, okay, yeah, don't mess with things like that.
Well, Dr. J, you keep bringing up dolls, and I hate dolls. I like everything I focus on. And I've written 11 books. I've actually had 12 coming out. I never write about dolls. I never experience dolls. I'm not the person to talk to when it comes to dolls. I will say this, that I'm terrified of them. So I'm not gonna. I don't want to talk about them or. People try to scare me with dolls, to be honest with you. That's my biggest fear. I don't like dolls and I don't like clowns. So I have to.
You know what? I'm so glad you mentioned clowns. I watched a documentary on John Wayne Gacy, a sick person. Now, I had a question. Did Stephen King write it about Pennywise, or did he write a fictional character based on Pogo the Clown?
Well, I will say this. Actually, I just wrote a book called Ghostwriters, and one of the people that I focused on was Stephen King. I went to Bangor, Maine, which is where it was written by Stephen King. I went to all the locations that inspired the book. I think that if you ask Stephen King what him, it came from. There was, I guess, a legend involving like a goat under under a bridge, Billy Goat kind of thing. So something that kind of fuels imagination. I'm going to the that inspired the book. It makes total sense that, and if you actually read it, it is not just Pennywise the clown. It comes in different forms. That's the manifestation that it likes the most, but it comes in different shapes and forms. I do think that when Stephen King wanted something that would really terrify people, and he realized that there were a lot of people that were like really scared of clowns, and so it was like him less about Pogo and Gacy and more about knowing that clowns terrify people, so he was trying to scare people like with the most terrifying thing ever, and a clown was it.
You know, there's this video that recently came out. It's a young woman. I'm assuming she's from America, but she very well could be from England. But it's definitely, she doesn't have much of an accent. If it is, it's British. She travels to South Korea by herself, and while she's live streaming, you see a McDonald's type clown behind her. She brushes it off. She goes to the next location, and there's the doll again. She goes to the mall. The doll is chasing her. And I don't understand why nobody around her and this, clown did anything about it. It's like they walked right past the clown that was staring directly at her. And if I was a young woman, a beautiful young woman, in a foreign country by myself, I'd be scared. You know, I don't. That's it. I'd be deathly scared for a good reason.
I'm mortified of clowns. I'm like literally like I have a clown phobia. So like that story is something I want to block from my brain because I don't want to. I'm mortified of clowns and dolls. I just told you that.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that's a horrible story.
Very horrible. Actually, that it's causing me to create a phobia of clowns myself. But aside from that, we're done with the dolls and the clowns. Let's move on here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Now, let's talk about some of the most haunted houses in Salem, or is it just areas? Because I would think since then we have had built stuff.
I focus on New England, so I definitely Salem town. Like I give tours in Salem, so Salem has a lot of locations that are very haunted. My book Wicked Salem goes into a lot of those locations, but in my book Wicked Salem, I really go into not just modern day Salem, as I said earlier. Salem Village was Danvers, it was Topsfield, it was Andover, so areas outside of what we view as Salem. But yeah, I think Salem definitely, I would say, is one of the top most haunted locations in the country, without hesitation. And I said that on multiple shows. As far as like locations, I mean, it really makes difference. Like one year it'll be one location, the next year it'll be another location. So I can't really pinpoint the most haunted location. Like Ropes Mansion is a very haunted location. I gave tours at the House of Seven Gables, very haunted location. I think that it really depends on. I don't think the spirits are bound at locations. I think that they can roam, and I think in Salem they roam and they play with you. So cemeteries, without a doubt, are probably the most haunted cemeteries. There's the Howard Street Cemetery, which I think is the most haunted cemetery in New England, and then we have the Charter Street Cemetery or Bearing Point, which is the most visited cemetery in New England, but also I would say one of the most haunted as well. So cemeteries, for whatever reason, and I don't think it's those who are buried there that haunt cemeteries. I think it's the bad stuff lingering, wanting to attach on the newbie investigator kind of thing. So I think it's also conjuring and people, doing things like rituals and stuff that kind of open up a portal to the other side.
Now, would you say that Salem is the most haunted in the world or just in America?
I would say Salem is the most haunted in New England. Having grown up in the South close to New Orleans, I would say New Orleans is up there too. So it's just the energy, it's the spirit of the place. So New Orleans, Salem, I would say like Savannah, Georgia is on the list. And you're having done like bits and pieces. As far as like the actual town, like a haunted town, I would say Salem is definitely one of the most haunted towns. It doesn't have the most haunted locations like the haunted houses, but it does have it. The land is the most haunted in the country.
Have you ever heard of the ghost or ghost spirits in Hawaii called the Night Marchers?
No, actually, I've never been to Hawaii. What's the backstory with those spirits?
I know it's supposed to go back to long before King Kamehameha, and a new movie was created, a fictionalized movie, but in the production of the movie, every time the Cousins brothers who made the movie went out and spoke to a firefighter or police officer, they were all told they cannot talk about it. Now, to me, instead of just saying, nah, it doesn't exist, but saying, no, I'm sorry, I can't talk about that, that gives more credence that something is real. I can't even tell you what they look like. I'm sure if you Googled night marchers, you'll find images, but it has something to do with fire.
Are they like skinwalkers, or do they change form?
They definitely change form, and there's always like a drum beat sound when they're coming to you, and they're obviously usually harm you, and it's always involving fire, meaning whether they're holding fire, their heads on fire, whatever it be. No one can pinpoint when this legend was started, but again, even during the filming of the Night Marchers film, the movie that was just in the theaters in Hawaii, number one, by the way, if the Cousins brothers are listening, in the state of Hawaii, of all other movies that came out in October, that people are so scared of it, but more so during the film, and they caught a paranormal image, which could be the Night Marchers, because they're talking about a forbidden topic.
So it sounds like to me that there's a generalized thing where they're called, it's called elementals. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like the is an elemental. It's a fire elemental. We have that in New England as well. We have elementals. I've encountered elementals, and they're neither good nor bad. They're kind of like they're indifferent, but they're not human. So it sounds like it's possibly an elemental entity or spirit that probably is Native American related, and it sounds like they're Native people of Hawaii related. I do think that some land is cursed. I think in New England, like Salem has a horrific backstory with the Salem witch trials, but the Native American backstory is equally as horrific. I mean, that land was like the land that the Native Americans refused to go to. It was cursed land to the natives too. If you look at a lot of the Native American backstory to the most haunted locations, they also thought it was haunted too. Like the Freetown State Forest. A lot of horrible things have happened. There were, cult murders. There were, all sorts of death and horrible things that happened. And and Freetown State Forest is just like such an anomaly and has a very intense Native American backstory to it as well. So, getting back to the Night Marchers, I think we have that too, but it's just a different a different name, and a different way of manifesting. But I definitely have encountered elementals on my investigations, and I think that they're holy. They're holy. They're Native American. They're the earth being upset with how we're treating Mother Earth, and they're letting us know that.
Have you used your skills and been paranormal investigating or ghost hunting in other countries?
I've investigated in Mexico, and I have investigated in Canada. I haven't investigated overseas, like in England. I would love to. I actually did I have a lot of friends I have a lot of readers who are in the UK. I have a lot of readers who are in Australia, of all places. So I haven't, but that's in my future. I definitely think that I'm expanding beyond New England. And if there's anything related to the Salem witch trials overseas, I'd love to go to those locations. Or anything related to witch trials, because the witch hunt happened in England. So it goes back before Salem. Salem was the finale of many men and women who were accused of witchcraft and executed. So no, but that's in my future.
Yeah, right. And I would think because of the spirituality and the sicarios, also known as hitmen in Mexico, with a high murder rate, that there are a lot of ghosts in south of the border. I really think that. That's why they really, I don't want to say, fantasize them, idolize them, but they definitely talk about them in a respectful manner.
I was when I say investigated in Mexico, I was kind of like forced to investigate because I was in like Playa del Carmen, and I was in like near Cozumel, and because I'm clairvoyant, I was having experiences like with the spirits left and right. So yeah, I mean like in the same with Canada, they weren't as prevalent. In Mexico, they were all over the place. It was just very much part of my experience in Mexico, and it was to the point where I wanted to leave Mexico.
Yeah, right.
Like,
I would too.
It's supposed to be this relaxing vacation that turned into like a clairvoyance nightmare with just like spirits all around me. We're in this very beautiful beach house where I should have been like relaxed and happy, but it was just like one spirit after another. It was like a ghost hotel for me. So it wasn't. So I would say that you're right. I think in Mexico there's so many untapped spirits, and I think that there's a lot of fear in Mexico, and that those spirits are very strong because of that fear. It feeds off people's fear.
I have a couple more questions here, and let me say this to everybody who's writing questions. If I missed your question and I have yet to get to it, meaning I've caught up with what I see, please copy and paste it, and please make sure it's in caps. I do see every single one of your chat, your remarks, but as far as questions, if it's in caps, I can know if there's three waiting, etc., etc. So let me go in order. Let's see here. Do ghosts ever choose to haunt only one person? Do they ever target someone and only them, like a troll?
I think that spirits go for the strongest psychic in the room. So I think I've been targeted, but that's because I have I'm like a beacon of light to them, and they'll come to me. So people like us, or like me, they'll be targeted. I don't think spirits. I think a lot of times that they want attention. They want someone like me to tell their story. Sometimes they want to be crossed over. So I wouldn't say that they necessarily target an individual, but they target people that shine, that have the bright light, beacon of light that come from them.
Let me give another shout out for another super chat. Justin T, thank you again, brother. And like I said, blue skies, and we will jump in 2020. I got to make my 129th jump and more, and I'm going to add that to your list too. Okay, more for you, Sam. Here it goes. Does he think ghosts are frozen where they are, or do they eventually move on? And if they move on, why do they move on?
I think that spirits aren't frozen. There's different types of spirits. So there's residual, which is not, I wouldn't even consider it a ghost. I would consider it energy that psychically imprinted itself on the location, and it doesn't interact with you. So I think that energy is probably always going to be there. And that's a lot of the energy that you would find in New England and Boston in the streets. I think it's a rare thing